And our universe pulled out a wonderful transformation in the being of J.D. Stillwater. And at this point, I'd like to welcome him and invite him to share his wisdom.
I think I'm now set up. I want to start with a just a quote, an excerpt from The Little Prince. Did anyone read that in school or maybe in church school? Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Supposing I know of a flower that is absolutely unique, that is nowhere to be found except on my planet. And any minute that flower could accidentally be eaten up by a little lamb. Isn't that important? If a person loves a flower that is the only one of its kind on all the millions and millions of stars, then gazing at the night sky is enough to make him happy. Flowers are the in-your-face sex organs of angiosperm plants. They don't hide them or cover them or have wardrobe malfunctions. They have no shame, no use for shame. They have nothing to hide. They make their genitals big, showy, colorful banners of their pride in being sexual beings. And sexuality is one of the universe's emergent properties. For the first 12 billion years, the universe had no sex. The first sexual reproduction in the known universe happened a little over 1 billion years ago here on Earth, when life itself was already 2.5 billion years old. And it happened in the global ocean that surrounded the supercontinent Rodinia, among a red algae hilariously known as Bangiomorpha pubescens. I might be pronouncing it wrong, but my way is just too much fun. As it happens, a nearly identical species of red algae still lives in the ocean today. And this algae literally invented sex. And it's a common ancestor to both the flowers in your neighborhood today and the people who planted them. For the previous 2.5 billion years of life on Earth, reproduction happened asexually, where a cell simply copies its genetic material and then divides into two smaller cells. Asexual reproduction is easy peasy. It's in its own way, it's perfect. Asexual reproduction is incredibly efficient. It's fast, and it yields offspring that are nearly exact copies of the parent. No need to go searching for a mate. You just duplicate yourself. No recessive genes that could combine to kill your child as it grows. You know, you just can't beat it for simplicity, fidelity, and efficiency. So biologists wondered how sexual reproduction, where each parent sacrifices half of their genome and has to spend time and energy connecting with another parent, how did sexual reproduction ever even compete with asexual reproduction? Why didn't it quickly die out? Well, it turns out the only genetic advantage of sex is that it fosters diversity. Sexual reproduction scrambles the genome in each new generation, creating new combinations and new possibilities, new differentiations, new complexities for natural selection to play with. So, you know, sexuality is the tornado in a scrapyard that can actually assemble an airplane. And sex is wonderful because diversity is wonderfully adaptive. A species with sex has enough diversity to sustain huge environmental swings. So maybe we shouldn't be all that surprised that sex-shaming cultures usually aren't very keen on diversity either. When you watch an E. coli cell divide on a microscope slide, the two resulting cells are identical twins. There's no diversity, they're clones. Asexual reproduction is still around among simple species, but it takes a lot of generations to generate diversity. Sexual reproduction means every rose, every hummingbird, every human, every dog and cat, every pine tree, every lobster is a unique individual in the entire cosmos. Flowers are the plant kingdom's full-time sex-positive pride celebration. And oh, the diversity. There are between 250,000 and 400,000 unique species of flowering plants. In other words, we have no idea how many species of flowers there are. We just know it's a really big number. Did you know that oak trees have flowers? Grasses too. A pineapple is a flower. Broccoli is a flower. The tallest and smallest angiosperm plants are mountain ash trees and the tiny little Wolflia eriza. It's a kind of pond scum. Cacti have flowers. The world's biggest flower is the stinking corpse lily, Rafflesia arnoldii, pollinated by flies, which are attracted to its maggoty roadkill scent. Scent is probably not the right word. It stinks. Flowers as symbols of cosmic communion and differentiation offer an unusual perspective on sex because plants can't just head out to the singles bar or sign up for Tinder when they're seeking a mate. Most plants are stuck where they're rooted, so their lovemaking requires intermediaries, the beloved and now threatened community of pollinators. And this is a tremendously inclusive affair. Pollinators include bees, hummingbirds, moths, butterflies, ants, bats, a recently discovered species of frog, and even more recently, Ethiopian wolves who lick nectar from the red-hot poker plant's blossoms, and they get their muzzles covered with pollen before they go to the next plant. So you can think of all this transactionally. You know, the pollinator gets nectar, the plant gets its gametes carried far afield. But I prefer to think of the relationship as a kind of lovemaking, a gesture, a dance, a mutual ecstasy of interspecies generosity. Just watch a honeybee rolling around in a sweet-smelling bath of floral delight and tell me that isn't the height of pleasure and connection. To consummate this three-way relationship, flowers and their pollinators have evolved some pretty surprising strategies. For example, hummingbirds have long beaks for reaching the well-hidden pools of nectar deep inside the elongated flowers that they visit, unwittingly getting pollen on their perfectly shaped beaks, pollen that they then carry to the third party in this interspecies menage a trois, which of course is another flower. It's the birds and the bees, but in living color. The evening primrose is primarily pollinated by the hawk moth, and evening primroses open rapidly at dusk, precisely the time that hawk moths are most active. You know, this happens within seconds. And it's quite a show for a June evening, one that Anne and I used to attend regularly for a year or two when we had evening primroses growing right outside our house. There's a hawk moth on a thistle. It's hard to catch on video in daylight because it comes out right at dusk. Sex, whether it's among flowering plants or graceful animals, is a child of life's creativity. Life pushes into new territory, and that requires a certain independence, a certain separation from familiar landscapes. But because no species can exist alone for long, others follow almost immediately. So the evolution of life on this planet is a dance around the yin-yang symbol, do-si-doing with separation, even as it promenades with interbeing and communion. Sexuality and the riot of flowers that populate its PR department. Sex embodies the communion half of that dance and also the differentiation half. Life longs for diversity and difference, and yet in finding it becomes lonely and longs in turn for reunion and connection. This cycle of leaving and longing that spins out the Matisse painting of Earth's diversity, while fostering ecstasy with each communion of souls and genes. A holy union that recombines all that glorious multicolored complexity into a new constellation of love's creations in each new generation. Matisse is actually probably a good analogy for the riot of flowers' multi-hued creativity, but it's a different painter whose flowers remind us that sexuality is a gift, a birthday present of uncountable watercolor paints hidden in our genes and our urges. Of course, I'm referring to Georgia O'Keeffe, whose bold brushstrokes speak to our own longings for beauty, connection, sensuality, and an affirmation of our wholeness, our anatomical perfection, especially in the places that our culture would make dirty or shameful. Let's let these blossoms remind us that at any age or size or shape, our bodies are blossoms of nature's perfectly sensual cycles of creativity, of longing and communion. So every time we see a flower, let it remind us that we are sexual beings, forever joined in an orgasmic, interdependent interbeing with all life on earth, part of nature's cosmic creative course, made of nature's love and longing for itself through and through, because all of life is one.